In February of 2026, the most powerful generals in Pakistan locked themselves inside a sealed room in Rawalpindi. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and silence. On the giant screens in front of them, satellite images of Kabul flickered in real time. Roads, TTP compounds, Taliban ammunition depots, houses where, just a few years earlier, their own intelligence officers had shared tea with the men now marked as targets. And for the first time in the history of this nation, those generals made a decision nobody imagined was possible. They decided to declare war on the monster they themselves had created. Not a cold war, not a proxy war, open war, official, televised, announced by the defense minister on live camera. The problem? This monster had already killed more than 4,000 Pakistanis in a single year. 15 civilians dying every single day. Children, doctors, mothers carrying groceries home. And this monster wasn't gonna stop. It couldn't stop. Because what Pakistan was about to discover in the bloodiest way possible is that the beast they had raised for 30 years no longer recognized its master. And now it wanted the master dead. In the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you a story that reads like a geopolitical thriller but is happening right now. In this exact moment, while you watch this video, I'm going to show you 3 things that almost nobody explains correctly about this conflict. First, how Pakistan spent 30 years feeding, arming, training, and protecting the Taliban, thinking it was the key to defeating India. And why that decision became the greatest self-inflicted wound in modern geopolitical history. Second, there's a detail about a private conversation held behind closed doors in Kabul between the Taliban's defense minister and his intelligence chief that completely changes who the villain of this story really is. Most people think they know who the bad guys are here. After you hear this conversation, I promise you will rethink everything. And third, at the end, I'm going to explain to you why this war is mathematically, historically, geographically impossible to win for either side, and what that means for the rest of the world, including the country you are watching this from. Whether you live in the United States, Brazil, Europe, India, or anywhere else, this war is going to touch your life. You just don't know it yet. But before we get there, we have to go back in time. Because to understand why Pakistan is now bombing the very capital it once built, we have to rewind to 1994, to a dusty road, a one-eyed madrasa teacher nobody had heard of, and a convoy of fuel tankers that would change the fate of an entire region. 1994, Afghanistan is burning. The Soviet Union had already collapsed and left the country, and in the vacuum that followed, the civil war erupted that nobody knew how to stop. Warlords carving up provinces like slices of cake, villages being raped and burned, heroin flooding the roads, kids growing up with Kalashnikovs instead of school books. Into this chaos drives a convoy. Inside it, officers from the ISE, Pakistan's intelligence agency, one of the most powerful and secretive intelligence services on earth. They are heading to meet a man almost nobody knows, a practically unknown madrasa teacher in a small village near Kandahar. A man who wore a black turban, had a long beard, and couldn't see out of one eye after being wounded fighting the Soviets. His name, Mullah Omar. The ISI officers sat down with him, and they made a proposal that sounds simple on the surface, but carried the weight of an entire geopolitical doctrine. We give you weapons, they said. We give you money, we give you training, we give you trucks, fuel, and a network of religious schools inside Pakistan, where we recruit fighters for you by the thousands. In exchange, you take control of Afghanistan. You unify the country, and you do exactly what we tell you to do. Now take a breath and ask yourself, why would Pakistan do this? Why would an entire nation pour resources into building a private army in another country? The answer is one word, and this word is going to keep echoing through every chapter of the story. India.
mutual hatred since the violent partition in 1947. 4 wars, nuclear weapons pointed at each other, an open wound called Kashmir. And inside the Pakistani military establishment, there was a doctrine that had reached the level of an unquestionable truth, a doctrine called strategic depth. The idea was chillingly simple. If Pakistan ever went to war with India and started losing territory, it would need somewhere to retreat, somewhere to regroup, somewhere to keep its nuclear arsenal safe from Indian bombers. Afghanistan, sitting right on Pakistan's western border, was the perfect answer. A friendly backyard, an allied government that would follow orders from Islamabad and Rawalpindi.
An entire country turned into a strategic reserve. It seemed brilliant on paper. Mullah Omar accepted the deal, and the IRC delivered everything it had promised, and then some. Tanker trucks rolling across the border full of fuel, crate after crate of Kalashnikovs, rocket launchers, ammunition. And most importantly, the entire network of madrasas inside Pakistan, especially in the tribal regions bordering Afghanistan, was turned into a recruitment pipeline. Young boys, often orphans of the Afghan wars, were taken in, given food and shelter, taught an extremely radical interpretation of Islam, and then funneled across the border to fight for the Taliban. In 2 years, the results were shocking. 1996. The Taliban entered Kabul, tortured the former president in a way too graphic to describe on this video, and hung his body from a traffic light for everyone to see. The country was now theirs. When the world looked at this new regime in horror, only 3 countries officially recognized the Taliban government: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Pakistan. Islamabad was celebrating. Strategic depth was no longer a theory, it was real. There was a country on the map, and it belonged to them. But then came September 11th, 2001, the Twin Towers, 3,000 civilians dead in a few hours. The world changed forever, and Pakistan found itself caught in the worst possible position. The United States was about to invade Afghanistan to destroy Al-Qaeda and the Taliban government that sheltered them. And George W. Bush delivered a message to Pakistan that was practically a threat. You are either with us or you are against us. Pakistan had to choose between its creation, the Taliban, and the most powerful military on earth. So it did something that, in my opinion, is the exact center of everything that came after. Pakistan decided to play both sides publicly. It joined the American war on terror. It let American planes fly through its airspace. It handed over some Al-Qaeda operatives. It took billions of dollars in American military aid. Secretly, it kept providing safe houses, training, money, and intelligence to the Taliban for 20 years. 2 entire decades of double dealing, taking American money with one hand and handing it to the Taliban with the other. It is one of the most extraordinary acts of strategic duplicity in modern history, and nobody is going to forget it anytime soon. So think with me for a second, because this is important. Pakistan created the Taliban to control Afghanistan. When America finally pulled out in August of 2021 after 20 exhausting years, and the Taliban swept back into Kabul in a matter of days, Pakistan's Prime Minister at the time, Imran Khan, went on television and celebrated. He said the Afghan people had broken the chains of slavery. The word he used was slavery. He was talking about the Americans leaving, but between the lines he was celebrating something else. He thought his puppets were back in power. He thought strategic depth had finally been completed after decades of patience. He thought Pakistan had won. He was wrong. He was spectacularly, historically, catastrophically wrong, because there is an invisible law in geopolitics that Pakistan chose to ignore. And this is where the story turns sharply, in a way that is gonna make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the Middle East and South Asia. The law is this: power born out of religious fanaticism does not obey whoever created it. It obeys only its own internal logic. And in this case, that logic already had a name. Pakistan had been pretending didn't exist for years, a name that would soon start appearing in headlines about schools burning, buses exploding, soldiers ambushed on mountain
established the Pakistani Taliban. This group was formed by men who came directly out of the same IC-funded madrasas. They studied the same books, they prayed to the same extremist interpretation of faith. They fought side by side with the Afghan Taliban against American soldiers. But when Pakistan decided to publicly support the American war on terror, something broke inside them. They saw Pakistan as a traitor to the cause, a Muslim state that had sold itself to the infidels for dollars. And they turned the weapon against their own creator. The TTP has one symbol crystal clear all over, though the elected government of Pakistan destroy the constitution, impose an extremist interpretation of Sharia law across every inch of Pakistani territory. The United Nations classifies the group as a terrorist organization. So do the United States, the European Union, India, and most of the Western world. But the TTP did it by pursue this goal is one of the darkest pages in the recent history of Asia. December of 2014.
A scene that no Pakistani will ever forget. Peshawar, a city in the northwest of Pakistan, close to the Afghan border. Army, public school.
10 o'clock in the morning, a normal school day. Picture it for a second. Children aged 8, 10, 15. Some of them are solving math problems. Some are chatting with friends during break. Some are eating the sandwiches their mothers had packed that morning before sending them off to school with a kiss on the forehead. Backpacks on the floor. Pencils on the desks. Laughter in the hallways, and then silence, and then gunfire. 7 TTP terrorists wearing suicide vests and carrying assault rifles had jumped the school wall. They moved from classroom to classroom methodically, calmly, and opened fire on children. 132 children killed. 132. A teacher named Tahira Kazi, 58 years old, was shot dead, trying to shield her students with her own body, pushing them behind her so the bullets would hit her first. In total, 149 people died that morning. It was the darkest day in the history of Pakistan. An entire nation stopped breathing, and that attack was not the end. It was the beginning of a new era, because ever since the Afghan Taliban came back to power in 2021, giving the TTP a safe rear base inside Afghanistan, TTP attacks have exploded. In 2024, Pakistan officially recorded 2,236 deaths linked to terrorism. In 2025, 4,001, practically double in a single year. Roadside bombs, ambushes on military convoys, targeted assassinations of police officers, suicide bombers at markets. Pakistan's own army chief Asim Munir, in a rare public statement, called the TTP a fundamental enemy. Not an enemy, a fundamental enemy, meaning an existential threat, a threat to the existence of the state itself. And here is where the whole story becomes absolutely bizarre, and where the twist promised you earlier finally lands. I want you to really pay attention to this, because this is the piece almost every news report misses. Where does the TTP escape after every single attack? Where do its leaders lie? Where are its training camps? The answer: Afghanistan. And who gives them shelter, protection, food, weapons, and legitimacy? The Afghan Taliban. The exact same Taliban that Pakistan built, funded, armed, and protected for 3 decades. Think about the sheer irony for a moment. Pakistan's greatest enemy is being protected by Pakistan's oldest friend. It is exactly what Pakistan did to the United States when it gave shelter to Osama bin Laden in a compound a few hundred meters from its own military academy. History didn't just repeat itself, it folded in on itself like an origami of karma. The same knife Pakistan held against America's back is now being held against its own. And here is the question everyone asks, but few answer correctly. Why doesn't the Afghan Taliban just hand over the TTP? Pakistan has demanded it openly for years. Kill their leaders, close their camps, hand them over for trial, problem solved. And the Afghan Taliban says no, every single time. Why?
Here is the detail that changes everything. Picture this scene. It is not my invention. It is based on reports from regional intelligence analysts. Imagine a closed room in Kabul, heavy curtains, no phones allowed. The Taliban's defense minister has just received a call from Islamabad. On the other end of the line, a Pakistani general delivering a message wrapped in diplomatic words, but meaning exactly this: wipe out the TTP or we will bomb you into the Stone Age. The defense minister hangs up. He sits down in silence, then he looks at his intelligence chief across the table. He asks calmly, what happens if we do what they want? The intelligence chief answers with a single sentence that paralyzes the entire Afghan government. If we attack the TTP now, thousands of the fighters will not surrender. They will defect to ISIS. Khorasan, Afghanistan will turn into an even worse hell than the one we just inherited. ISIS, Khorasan, ISIS-K, a splinter of the Islamic State that operates in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the Taliban's biggest regional rival, an even more extreme group that considers the Afghan Taliban too soft, too moderate, too political. ISIS-K doesn't want to govern Afghanistan. It wants to burn it and build a global caliphate on the ashes. And the Taliban knows something the rest of the world doesn't fully grasp yet. If the TTP is destroyed as a structure, those men won't become bakers or farmers. They are lifelong fighters. They only know how to hold a rifle. They will defect en masse to the group that represents the most radical expression of their ideology, ISIS-K. Which means destroying the TTP actually strengthens the Taliban's worst enemy from within. The Taliban is trapped, and Pakistan is trapped too, because it can't accept an enemy that slaughters its children.
Nobody can back down. Nobody can compromise. And that right there is why war became absolutely inevitable. February 2026, everything finally collapses. And it collapses in just 2 weeks. On the 16th of February, a TTP unit attacks a Pakistani border checkpoint. 11 security officers killed, and a child. Pakistan responds with immediate airstrikes deep inside Afghan territory. And then the Afghan Taliban does something absolutely unprecedented. Something it had never done before. It launches a coordinated military offensive along the border. This was not a skirmish. This was not a border incident. This was regular Taliban army units crossing into disputed zones, firing artillery, coordinating movements with radios. A real military operation by a government against another government that has nuclear weapons. On the 27th of February, Pakistan's defense minister, Khawaja Asif, walks in front of the cameras. He is wearing a dark suit. His face is tight, and he delivers the sentence that freezes the entire region. Pakistan's patience has run out. Open war declared, not against India, the enemy everyone had expected for decades, against the very Taliban. Pakistan had built with its own hands that same day. Pakistani F-16 jets take off. Their targets: Kabul, Kandahar, and Paktia, brigade headquarters, ammunition depots, Taliban leadership compounds. Why was Kandahar especially important? Because Kandahar is the spiritual birthplace of the Taliban. It is where the movement started in the 1990s. It is where Haibatullah Akhundzada, the Taliban's current supreme leader, reportedly lives in a compound surrounded by silence and loyal guards. Pakistan was sending a very specific message with those bombs. We can reach your head. We can reach your holy city. Nothing is off limits anymore. And then came the 16th of March, the darkest day of this entire conflict near Kabul. There is a hospital called Omid. Omid means hope in Persian. It specializes in treating addiction, heroin, which, in a terrible irony, Afghanistan produces more of than anywhere else on earth. It was the holy month of Ramadan. Muslims across the region were fasting from dawn to sunset.
Inside the Omid hospital, patients were lying in their beds trying to recover from addiction. Families were visiting them during the day, bringing small gifts, reading verses. Children running in the corridors, nurses preparing medication. And then, without warning, a Pakistani missile slammed into the building. Afghanistan claimed more than 400 people died in that single strike. 400 people inside a hospital during Ramadan. Pakistan responded with a statement saying the actual target was a terrorist infrastructure hidden near the hospital. Not the hospital itself, but the photos that came out in the following days told the story words could not cover. Hospital beds buried under concrete, IV bags dangling from twisted metal, blood-stained prayer mats, shoes without owners, pill bottles scattered across the debris like confetti. And screams, no television, Vatican silence. The international reaction was so intense that Pakistan was forced to pause the airstrikes until after Eid, the Muslim holiday that ends Ramadan. But this pause was an illusion, a ceremonial break in a fight that had no intention of ending. On the 26th of March, the bombings resumed, and they have not stopped since. Every week now, more than 100 civilians die, 15 people per day. Children, doctors, pregnant women, farmers, shopkeepers, taxi drivers, ordinary people who have nothing to do with the TT, with the Afghan Taliban, with the IC, or strategic rep, with any of the grand games being played over their heads. They are simply standing in the wrong place when the missiles arrive. And here is the part I promised you at the very beginning of this video. Why this war is mathematically, geographically, historically impossible to win. For either side, Afghanistan has no real air force. It cannot win a conventional war against a nuclear-armed state with modern fighter jets. Pakistan completely dominates the airspace. That is why the Taliban has been forced to rely on unconventional methods. Kamikaze drones crossing the border, attacks on military bases, assassinations of Pakistani officers, asymmetric warfare. But Pakistan has its own wall. We cannot climb. Pakistan cannot invade Afghanistan on the ground. This is not opinion. This is history written in blood. The British Empire tried 3 times and lost. The Soviet Union, with 500,000 soldiers, tried for 10 years and lost. The United States, with the most advanced military in history, tried for 20 years and lost. Afghan soil was made for guerrilla warfare. Mountains, caves, valleys, where a single man with the rifle can stop an entire column. The Taliban fighters are, without exaggeration, the greatest mountain guerrilla fighters alive today.
So what happens in this impossible war? According to regional analysts, a concept called coercive diplomacy. Translated into plain words, an endless cycle of strikes, followed by ceasefires, followed by more strikes, followed by more ceasefires. Qatar and Turkey mediating for a week, peace signed. Then a TTP attack, then Pakistani airstrikes, then another ceasefire, then another attack, forever. There is no winner in this equation. Only the dead keep piling up. And there is one last detail that turns this entire story from a tragedy into a perfect, almost literary tragedy. Remember why Pakistan created the Taliban in the first place? Strategic depth against India, a buffer zone, a weapon pointed at New Delhi. Guess what the Taliban is actually doing right now in 2026? Signing trade agreements with India, construction contracts being awarded to Indian engineering companies, infrastructure projects built with Indian funding, diplomatic meetings held in Kabul with Indian officials. The Taliban today treats India as a strategic partner. The very enemy Pakistan spent 30 years and billions of dollars trying to contain is now shaking hands with Pakistan's own creation right next door, while Pakistan watches powerless through the smoke of its own bombs. Let me lay it out one more time, because this sequence deserves to be engraved in stone. Pakistan created the Taliban. The Taliban sheltered the TTP. The TTP slaughtered Pakistanis. Pakistan is now burning Afghanistan to the ground, trying to put out the fire. And meanwhile, India, the enemy they wanted to weaken, is calmly signing contracts in Kabul. If you wrote this as a screenplay, Hollywood would reject it for being too on the nose. Now I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments, because I read them all.
Do you think Pakistan can put out this fire? Or is it gonna burn until there's nothing left to burn? And more importantly, do you think any country, anywhere in the world will ever learn the lesson? Pakistan is learning right now the lesson that when a state uses terror as a political tool, terror eventually turns around and uses the state. We have seen this story before in different languages, on different continents, with different flags. The United States and Afghanistan arming the Mujahideen against the Soviets in the 80s, only to see those same fighters evolve into Al-Qaeda. Israel quietly allowing Hamas to strengthen in Gaza in the early 2000s as a counterweight to the PLO, only to see Hamas become its greatest threat. Different countries, same pattern, and the pattern always ends with the same people paying the price. Civilians, children, women, ordinary men trying to make it home before the missiles arrive. If you made it this far, do me 3 quick favors. Leave a like on this video, because every single like pushes it further into the algorithm and helps more people understand what is really happening in the world, instead of relying on 15-second clips that explain nothing. Subscribe to the channel, because every single week I bring you a geopolitical story that mainstream media refuses to tell properly, either because it is too complex, too inconvenient, or too uncomfortable. And in the comments, type the word boomerang. Just that, boomerang. Because that is exactly what Pakistan is feeling right now. Every single weapon it launched in the last 30 years, every single fanatic it trained, every single dollar it invested in religious extremism as a political tool has come flying back directly at its own face. The boomerang has returned home, and the world is watching. And if you want to understand the full history of the Taliban from the very beginning, from the Soviet invasion through the rise of Mullah Omar, the Al-Qaeda years, the American occupation, and the dramatic return to power in 2021, there is a complete video on the screen right now that works as the perfect companion to this one. Click it, stay with me, because the world is only getting more complicated, and you deserve to understand it better than the headlines are telling you. I will see you on the next one.